3 points today for the Kia?
Well, I think first of all, this is a huge recall. I mean, there's an enormous impact. There's especially on anyone who owns a Kia or Hyundai vehicle. I think that's the big thing, and it doesn't affect all of them, but the more I look into it, it just affects a huge range of their car lines, from sedans to minivans to SUVs. Everything from I've found like everything from 2011 to 2018 is there's something in a lot of these. So that, I mean, that's one big thing, and the range of the and there are several issues. That's the other point. Originally starting with the engine failures, which was a manufacturing issue, and I think the other thing I've noted, it appears to be that these recalls are only for the 4-cylinder model engine, these Theta 2 designed engines, but then which originally was a 2-liter, 2.4, and now I see 1.6 liters are also mentioned in certain other recalls. So it's pretty clear to me that if you own, my takeaway advice from this would be, if you own a Kia or a Hyundai vehicle, whatever it is, go online and see if your vehicle is affected by a recall. I mean, you can just Google, where do I find a Kia Hyundai recall? I mean, as simple as that. But there's National Highway Transportation Safety,
NHTSA,
in the U.S., and Transport Canada in Canada, and it's it's pretty straightforward to. I've looked on the Transport Canada. You just put your VIN number in, and it'll go through all that stuff. So, and that applies to other cars too. If you want to know, whether if you're driving a Mercedes, do I have a recall? You can click your VIN number in and it'll tell you. I mean, things are always learned from recalls. And I think, the key thing, one thing about the Kia recall, at least the engine one, while it's freaky that your engine shuts off when you don't want it to, generally speaking, that's better than your car exploding in the middle of, like the Ford Pinto. So if we can say anything positive, while it's a crappy customer experience to have a car engine that shuts off, life is just full of surprises. And if that's the worst of it, well, it's better than the Pintos, where if you get hit from the back, your car blows up.
It's better than the alternative. So what are the issues? We started into the issues. So started with engine issues, engine failures.
The major one, started off, with the, I guess around, I think 2011's, back then, engine failure because of a manufacturing process where it left metal filings inside the engine and eventually caused the connecting rod bearings to fail. So you would experience the engine would certainly start to suddenly knock and then either stop running or actually literally throw a rod through the side of the motor. So not a good thing. And so if you own a car like that, my advice is, if you're driving, all of a sudden you hear this like knock, 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 knock from the engine, pull over, shut it off right away. It's done. Tow it in, get it fixed.
Yep. New motor time.
Yeah, that's the advice on that. Now, the other thing that's happened since those motors have been fixed is there's been some engine fire issues, and those seem to be coming from a few different sources. Some of them, there's a more recent recall. Some of them, they figure that when the engine's been replaced, as a high pressure fuel pipe on the engine that may not have been replaced properly, and that's causes a fuel leak and can cause the engine to suddenly catch on fire. So that's another one.
That's when you're operating the engine.
Yeah, that's when you're operating the engine. The other issue too is that there's some vehicles. Again, that's why this is such a big recall. There's some vehicles they figure that there's an oil leak that can cause oil to spray out on the hot catalytic converter or somewhere on the engine and can cause that to combust. Yeah. So there's another one, and then. There's also a catalytic converter overheating issue, which they figure is due to, again, this is only some models where it's probably a program like an engine management software feature that they can just reprogram the vehicle for that to prevent that. So we have like 3 or 4 things there. And then also, of course, there's some vehicles that have just combusted parked in a garage hours after they've been shut off. And I can't really find any information as to why that would happen, but we can only speculate, as we've talked. It's probably an electrical issue of some sort, because a fuel leak on a cold engine is going to make no difference. It's not going to cause a fire.
Yeah,
So,
it's the gas vapors, as we've spoken about. Gas vapors is what's dangerous. It's not liquefied gas.
Exactly. And I mean, the thing, I know this is kind of straying off a bit, but I think you and I talked about, why are these vehicles so prone to fires? I mean, for years, you've had like older cars, like a couple of decades back, where you've had like, fuel somewhat seeping out of the carburetor onto the engine, and it never catches on fire, or, oil leaks where, there's oil dripping on the exhaust and never catches on fire. I think it's like the larger engine compartment, these tight engine compartments, there's so much heat and, in the engine compartment, and also the high pressure fuel is just, it changes. It's a game changer. It's and technology we have nowadays, it just, sure. It works great. And there's the efficiency. It kind of speaks to the efficiency of the modern engine in a lot of ways.
And it's high pressure because it's more efficient. It's more, the gas is vaporized finer and finer and finer. So you're getting the maximum amount of power out of each liter of fuel.
And these are actually direct injection engines too, which will inject the fuel directly into the cylinder like a diesel. So it requires that high pressure to overcome the actual air pressure, the compressed air in the cylinder. So that's why the high pressure is there. Now, it's interesting with diesel leaking. I mean, diesel's not very combustible, so you can have a diesel fuel leak all over the place, and it usually I think about diesel catching on fire. I mean, the only time that seems to happen is if a train goes off a cliff, and it's all the weight and pressure of all that metal combining, then it'll catch on fire. But short of that, it takes a lot to light diesel. But gasoline's much more volatile.
Ultimately, and over the long run, these issues are going to be solved or ameliorated. They'll pay a compensation, and they'll give people new cars or whatever, similar to what Volkswagen had to do with the TDI fiasco.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it'll be better for people in the long run. We're going to have better cars. Kia and Hyundai will have better processes to build cars.
Yeah.
And it'll be safer. So you had some examples about how this has kind of taken place in the past, and how that's been, things do get better is the outcome. Yeah,
exactly. Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing that I think about, and you can see that the Audi 5000, when those had the issues of the car suddenly accelerating, and there's a lot of controversy about it. The car would suddenly accelerate. People had a fair amount of money. The stories where the person would start the car, go to drive, and the car would take off, suddenly accelerate, and go into a swimming pool or something like that, and crash through their garage wall into the swimming pool. But what came out of that, I think the really positive thing that came out of that, and by the way, they never figured out whether it was driver error. They never found a defect in the car. But what did happen is that the shift interlocks were installed. So before that car, you didn't even have to have your foot on the brake. You can just pull a car out of park. They would just move out of the way. You could just move it, which is actually dangerous. A lot of people died. There's not a lot of documentation about it, but a lot of Ford vehicles had problems where the vehicle would just drop from park to reverse, and a lot of people got killed. And the thing that's dangerous about that too is sometimes the car would drop out of park even when the car was parked. So just picking on Ford there, but it's a big thing. If you look and read about it, you'll see a lot about it. And, I mean, I worked on a lot of those Fords, and the shifters felt a little dodgy, like they didn't really lock as well in park as you'd like them to. But anyways, for the Audi, that created the shift interlock. So every car, from the mid to late 80s on, you'd have to put your foot on the brake, and then you'd be able to shift it out of park, which is a great idea. It prevents that whole thing of the car could suddenly accelerate after you put it in drive, but it eliminates any error of pulling it out or having your foot on the gas pedal when you're, instead of the brake. So that's probably the biggest thing I can think about. Otherwise, things like the Ford Pinto that exploded. I mean, apparently they just made a management decision. They knew the car would do that. It would cost $12 extra to change something on the car and they decide, nah, let's not do that. That's criminal to me. Whether anyone ever got charged, I don't know, but that's apparently the issue with that. But nonetheless, fixes are always found. I mean, the great thing about, I think, about human beings is we're always looking to make the world better. Although sometimes we get a little cheap and chintzy and put our own interests, corporations or human beings, whoever that is, ahead of the greater good.
So folks who are, again, just to reiterate, folks who have a Kia or Hyundai who might be involved or affected by this or don't know and want to check, their best option is to what?
Go online. Go on the internet, and you can. The simplest thing is, where do I find a recall for my Hyundai, blah blah blah, or my Kia Sportage, and just. In the U.S., it's NHTSA. They have a list of them. In Canada, it's Transport Canada, and other parts of the world. Actually, I don't really know what the recall situation is in other jurisdictions in the world, but in North America, those are the two to look at. But you can just Google simply Kia or Hyundai recall. Where do I find the information? Those two government websites I mentioned. I mean, you can just type your VIN number of your vehicle in, and it'll spit out a whole list of recalls for whatever it is. Because there's a number of different things that are happening, a number of different models, there's model years. I can say for sure, anything built in this decade, you need to look. Anything past that for Hyundai and Kia, I think you're safe, but probably worth looking anyhow. You never know what kind of hidden, might have been a Takata airbag recall or something that hasn't been dealt with, which is another huge, even bigger issue than this one we're talking about.
Well, I think the reason that we sort of picked on them a little bit was that, the whole idea, there's been a bit of publicity about some folks' garage burning down with the car parked in it, like you said, hours after it was stopped, and it burnt the house down. And if they wouldn't have got out of the house, it would have killed them.
Yeah, that's right.
A pretty dire consequence.
Yeah.
And it's not the only one. It's far from the only one.
Yeah.
It's not like it's happening to thousands, but it is happening to tens.
It's happened on a few occasions, and that's the interesting one is, in the research I've been doing, I haven't found any cause for that. Again, for the engine quitting, the knocking sound, the engine failure. I mean, they know that's a manufacturing problem. There's the catalytic converters overheating. There's probably a software issue. The fuel leak. When the car's driving, the engine catching on fire. It seems to be some models have oil leaks that can cause that. Other models have, possibly a fuel leak that's coming from the actual previous repair to the engine, the high pressure fuel pipe. But for these cars suddenly combusting in garages, there doesn't seem to be, and there's not a lot of them, but there's been a couple of at least a few occurrences. There doesn't seem to be a solution for that or a cause. And I would only speculate there's got to be an electrical problem of some sort, because even if you have a fuel leak, 3 hours after you shut the car off, it's not going to matter. That's not going to catch on fire.
Yeah.
You need a combustion source for that. So
it might be a wise thing if you have a Kia or Hyundai that is one of the ones that's affected, and check online to see. Maybe you need to park it outside and not in the garage.
I think that would be a very prudent thing to do. I would certainly not want to park mine until some sort of solution's found. Either that, or make sure all your fire detectors and things are working properly. But you'd be better safe to park it outside.
And Kias and Hyundais overall, you've worked on many of them over the last couple decades at least. How are they otherwise?
I mean, they're good cars. It's unfortunate for them that this has happened, because they really have built really good products over the years. I mean, I think about the early Hyundais I used to work on, the Pony, the Sonata. I mean, that was like a, among the worst of the worst. But it was a cheap car, and it was cheaply built. The plastic inside the car was cheap. But, I mean, I had a lot of customers that kept those cars going for a long time. I mean, the parts were really cheap. Things wore out faster, but the base engines were pretty reliable, and you could keep that car going for a long time. It's just it was just like 1970s technology sold in the 80s, so everything was but Kia and Hyundai, they become leaders, not followers like they used to be. So yeah, they made some great cars, and they're really nice products. So I'm sure they'll overcome it. But like you alluded to Volkswagen, with their diesel scandal. I mean, this is going to cost them a lot of money. When you think, you sell a car, you make a certain amount of money, then all of a sudden you're faced with having to replace the engine in every one of them, which is the largest single component. That's got to take a big hit to the bottom line.
So that's it. Check on your NHTSA and Transport Canada websites, or in your jurisdiction, whatever the government regulators are doing and showing online, so you can check your vehicle.
Yeah, do it before you have any problems.